Hello guys, this is Real Recaps. In this video, I will talk about a 2001 American erotic romantic thriller film, Original Sin. Before we start, I hope you will like and subscribe to the channel. Luis Antonio Vargas is a practical man who firmly believes he is incapable of experiencing love. To him, marriage represents a form of partnership. As the owner of a thriving coffee business, he finds himself too preoccupied to search for a wife. Consequently, he begins exchanging letters with an American woman named Julia Russell. She agrees to travel to meet him and become his wife. When Luis arrives to greet his future bride, he is astonished to see a woman who looks different from the photograph she had sent him. Julia explains that she intentionally sent a misleading picture, as she wanted him to value her for her personality rather than her physical appearance. Despite this, Luis himself is not entirely honest. He conceals the fact that he owns a business from Julia. The couple heads to Luis's estate, where they are married in a church. Following the wedding, they organize a celebration but sleep in separate rooms. Julia explains that she is not ready to be intimate with a stranger immediately and appreciates Luis's patience in waiting until she feels comfortable. The next morning, Julia surprises Luis by bringing him breakfast in bed. During their conversation, he discovers something new about her. She enjoys coffee, even though she had claimed in her letters to prefer tea. Julia reveals that her sister had read all her letters, and she didn't want Luis to know her true preference for coffee. They begin living a peaceful married life, gradually getting to know each other better. Eventually, Julia allows Luis to share a bed with her. From that point onward, their routine becomes more dynamic, and Luis feels happier than ever. He shares his joy with his business partner and suggests introducing him to Julia, as she has not been seen in public for some time. Luis invites his partner to a theater performance coming to town. At the theater, an unusual event occurs. Julia becomes visibly distressed when one of the actors appears on stage. During the intermission, she excuses herself and later speaks to the actor backstage. Luis observes this but receives no explanation, as Julia avoids the topic and redirects his attention with affection. Sometime later, Luis receives a letter from Julia's sister, Emily, expressing concern for Julia's well-being. Emily requests that Luis write to her about Julia's adjustment to her new environment, as she is worried and has even contacted the local embassy to locate her sister. Luis persuades Julia to respond, and she agrees. One night, Julia experiences a nightmare, and Luis comforts her. During this, he notices scars on her back. Although Julia prepares a letter for Emily, Luis offers to mail it himself. He also accompanies Julia to the bank, assuring her that she can withdraw any amount of money for her personal use. Julia plans to visit a tailor to have new dresses made. One day, Luis encounters a man named Walter, who introduces himself as a private investigator. Walter explains that he is engaged to Emily and has been asked to check on Julia. Luis reassures him that Julia is fine, but Walter insists on seeing her himself. Reluctantly, Luis invites Walter to visit their home. When Luis returns home, he forgets about Walter's visit, as Julia is overjoyed about receiving fabrics for her new dresses and expresses her gratitude in many ways. Despite this, Luis becomes curious about a locked chest Julia keeps. She claims to have lost the key and refuses to let him see inside. When Luis hugs her, he notices the scent of cigars, and Julia admits she attempted to smoke. Luis eventually mentions Walter's upcoming visit. Although Julia initially seems fine with the idea, she soon becomes anxious. Even the sound of her pet bird singing begins to irritate her. Not long after, the maid finds the bird dead. Luis's suspicions grow, and they are confirmed when Emily visits him at work. Emily shares a letter purportedly written by Julia, but she is certain it was authored by someone else. Upon examining the letter, Luis realizes that the woman he married is not Emily's sister. When Luis returns home, he discovers that Julia has left, taking all her belongings with her. He breaks open her chest and finds photos and clothing belonging to the real Julia. At the bank, he learns that she has withdrawn nearly all the money from his account. Heartbroken and desperate, Luis finds himself homeless and begins drinking heavily while frequenting questionable establishments. Although he genuinely loved Julia, her betrayal leaves him deeply wounded. In one of the establishments, Walter approaches Luis and sits down with him. He reveals that he is searching for Emily's sister, and Luis requests his help in finding his wife. Together, They begin their search and eventually discover that Julia is staying at a hotel. Luis and Walter also check into the same hotel. While Luis is momentarily distracted, Walter switches out the live bullets in Luis's gun for blanks to ensure he cannot harm his wife when he finds her. Luis eventually encounters his runaway wife at the hotel, where she is staying with a man named Colonel Worth, who knows her as Bonnie. Luis tracks Bonnie down and confronts her as she writes a letter to her accomplice, the one who had orchestrated the plan for Bonnie to become Luis's wife. Bonnie explains that she and her partner, Billy, met the real Julia on the ship. Upon learning about Julia's trip, Bonnie informed Billy, who later claimed that Julia had suffered an accident. Together, they devised a scheme to steal Luis Vargas' fortune. Bonnie admits that she gave the money to Billy and ran away because she had started falling in love with Luis. She also confesses that Billy forced her to write the letter to Emily, a move that would inevitably expose their deception. Luis, who has also fallen in love with Bonnie, finds himself unable to harm her. They spend the night together, and the next morning, Bonnie shares details of her life with him. She explains that she and Billy grew up in an orphanage, became actors, and eventually turned to theft, targeting wealthy, lonely men. The Colonel was supposed to be Bonnie's next victim, but when he came to visit her in the morning, Luis sent him away. Luis attempts to distance himself from Walter, who is still investigating Julia's disappearance and looking for Bonnie. However, Walter manages to find their new hideout and makes it clear that he has feelings for Bonnie as well. A confrontation ensues between Walter and Luis over a gun. In the scuffle, Luis accidentally fires a shot, and Walter falls to the floor. Several more shots follow, leaving Walter motionless. Believing Walter to be dead, Bonnie sends Luis to the train station to purchase tickets while she handles the body. However, Walter reappears, revealing himself to be Billy, her partner. Billy had known Luis's gun was loaded with blanks and had faked his death. Billy pressures Bonnie to return to their life of crime, arguing that Luis still has his business and its valuable share, which can be sold for a substantial sum. Billy convinces Bonnie to help him finalize the scheme, including a plan to kill Luis once everything is completed. He persuades her that Luis, as a businessman, would never adapt to her world and that she would become irrelevant in his life. When Luis returns, he and Bonnie leave together, unaware that Billy is following them. One night, Bonnie wakes up from a nightmare and decides to help Luis earn money through other means. She teaches him secret signals to use during card games. However, their plan to cheat seasoned gamblers backfires, and their ruse is quickly exposed. Luis is beaten and thrown out onto the street, while Bonnie is forced to pay for their deceit with her body. Following this ordeal, Luis realizes there is no alternative but to sell his share of the company to secure funds for their survival. He remains convinced that the police are pursuing him for killing Walter, which leads him to hide his money. Meanwhile, Bonnie reconnects with Billy, who carves another scar into her back to signify the completion of another successful scheme. Luis eventually returns with the money, and Bonnie prepares to kill him and steal the cash. She feigns concern about rats in the house and uses it as an excuse to obtain poison. Late at night, Luis follows her and overhears Bonnie discussing his murder with Billy. When she returns, Luis waits in the dark. Bonnie serves him coffee, which he realizes is poisoned. Luis confronts Bonnie, who admits to the plan she and Billy had devised. However, Luis's heartfelt declaration of love persuades her to reconsider. Although Luis drinks the poisoned coffee, Bonnie decides to save him. She takes him out of the house to protect him from Billy. Billy, however, tracks them down and threatens Bonnie's life. In the ensuing confrontation, Luis shoots Billy, this time using live ammunition. When witnesses arrive, Bonnie grabs the gun and finishes off Billy to protect Luis. She then urges Luis to find a doctor, as he has been poisoned. Bonnie is arrested and later recounts her story to a priest who comes to hear her confession before her execution. The young priest becomes enamored with Bonnie and, in an act of desperation, helps her escape by giving her his clothes to leave the prison unnoticed. After her escape, Bonnie reunites with Luis, and together they make a living through card games, with Bonnie secretly signaling Luis about the other players' cards. The end. Thanks for watching.